Hey folks, welcome to another episode. I have a riddle for you today. What do you get when you have corruption, greed, censorship, capitalism, the suppression of religious freedom, and the persecution of political dissidents? 中华人民共和国. In this video, I'll tell you all about how I found my calling to wage battle against the Communist Party of China. It really started as an interest for me. When I was a kid, I remember watching the Kung Fu movies. I'd go to the Chinese restaurants. I liked listening to them talk. I was fascinated by the characters. And that translated into an interest which I was able to explore when I was studying for my bachelor's degree. As you know, if you're going to be a lawyer, you need a bachelor's in something. So I was scrolling down the list of majors and I found Asian studies. I had learned other languages before, but this was unlike any of the other Western languages I learned. There are characters, thousands of them that you have to memorize, and depending on the intonation that you give a word, it can completely switch its meaning. I got to go to China a few times before law school. I loved it. I kept studying Chinese and just really pursuing that passion and something that I had never really felt anything like that before. During my first year of law school, which is supposedly, and it was, the most intense year of law school, I was also actively studying Chinese to get to a professional level to where I could read legal documents and talk about the law with other clients. And people that knew I was doing this, they said, man, you're nuts. You need to spend time working on your outlines and studying for your classes. And I did, but I was putting in the extra time because I knew that there was something else I wanted to accomplish with that language. And wouldn't you know it, my law school offered a scholarship to take a student to Zhejiang University in Hangzhou, China, and to have that student study Chinese law for a year and to get credits for those classes here in the United States. So of course I applied and I got it. I was so thrilled. I'm going to China. I'm going to study law in Chinese with Chinese classmates, and it was a great experience. I've told some of you about my internship where I did corporate law in China and where I started having a change of heart about it. Well, going to law school in China was after that internship. I was still mixed. I didn't want to listen to my heart, which was telling me to go into public interest. And as I went to China and started studying and interacted with my classmates, it slowly started to change the way I felt. I knew about some of the human rights challenges that China was facing, but I didn't really dive myself into it. But what started to pique my curiosity was my classmates wanting to talk to me. When we were in a group, they would always behave and just talk really generally about things. But I noticed that when we were kind of one-on-one, they would start pouring their hearts out to me and they would talk about the country and some of the limitations and some of the abuses. And I started to really change the way I felt about that government. Then finally, there was one classmate that really changed my life forever. I was in the library studying, I think it was midterms, and it was actually a very small library. And he comes in and then he locks the door. And it was just the two of us. There was nobody else there. So I'm like, why is this guy locking the door? He sits next to me and he says, hey, my English name is Michael Jordan. Now, this guy was like 5'4", but he said it was Michael Jordan, so that's what I called him. And he says, hey, I know who you are. You're Fei Li. Fei Li is my Chinese name. And I have something I need to show you. I said, okay, what do you have to show me? He took out a USB. He gave it to me and he says, I need you to go home and watch this. And after you've watched it, please contact me because I want to talk to you about it. I said, sure. I took his number and I went home and started to watch the contents of the USB. It turned out it was a documentary about the tank men during the 1989 Tiananmen massacre. You remember, right? These tanks were on Chang'an Avenue and this really disgruntled citizen who knew what happened the night before, the slaughtering of thousands of students. He would not let the tanks through, and actually, once the tank had stopped, he even went up there and opened the lid and yelled at the soldier. He was taken away and nobody ever heard from him since. So I knew about it, but I watched the documentary to see if there was anything specific that maybe Michael Jordan wanted to talk to me about. Plus, there were Chinese subtitles in the bottom, and of course, I was really nerdy about studying the language, and so I learned some cool vocab. And then I contacted him the next day, and I met up with him, and I said, okay, MJ, so I saw the documentary, what's up? And what he told me shocked me, because at that point, I thought that China handled its dark history Like we do here. We learn about slavery, we learn about the human rights movements and all the ugly things that happen, and we learn it so we don't make the same mistakes over again. But Michael Jordan turned to me and said, I didn't know about these things until I saw this video. What? This was somebody that came from a wealthy family. This was somebody that was educated. This was not somebody living in the countryside who perhaps didn't have access to certain information. And this was a big deal in recent Chinese history. And for him to not know about it shows the great extent that the Chinese government goes to suppress information. It was really unbelievable. And so we decided to show the USB to a friend of ours who started teaching my wife Chinese and then later on just became our friend. And we asked her, do you know about what happened in Tiananmen Square in 1989? And she's like, no. Would you like to know about it? Sure. And we showed her the USB. This young lady was crying tears of anger, and she was just so angry at the government for hiding this from her. It was really sad to see, and I was shocked. And at that moment, I really started to change my heart. And I felt, you know what? Is there something I can do for these people? Not bringing in a bunch of international firms over to China to do business, but is there something I can do for the Chinese people who have been oppressed? I knew that in China I would be extremely limited because even if I could pass the Chinese bar exam, which is a long shot, they would not even let me sit for the exam, which is kind of weird because we let Chinese people sit for the exam here, but that's a discussion for another day. And so without being a licensed attorney there, there's not much that I could do. And even if I was a licensed attorney there, well, there wouldn't be much I could do either because they persecute attorneys who take on sensitive cases. So then I started to open my heart to possibilities of how I could advocate for Chinese who were oppressed and who now had come to the United States seeking refuge. I began to seek opportunities to help Chinese communities here in the United States, and I started meeting a lot of political refugees and started learning their stories about political persecution, religious suppression, oppression of minorities. I was shocked, I was appalled, and I was committed to spending a good part of my life fighting against that. I've had the opportunity to represent hundreds of dissidents from China, people who told stories about how they were arrested as they were attending a gathering in a secret church. Why is it a secret church? Because the government only gives them a communist-style church where they have to salute the flag and talk about the government, and it's not really a church, it's just a brainwashing mechanism. Because of China's family planning policy, I've also represented many women who were forced to have an abortion. They wanted to keep the child, but because of the quota, they were forcibly dragged into a hospital and suffered an inhumane abortion. I've represented lawyers who could no longer practice law there and who were being persecuted because of the clients they chose to represent. These are people that spent their whole lives studying something, and now to not be able to engage in that profession simply because of the clientele you chose to represent is inhumane, and it's a tragedy. And so as I represented these clients, I really developed a repugnance against the Communist Party of China and the atrocities they were committing against its people. If you would like to support my cause and motivate me to keep doing this, please smash the like button and I will thank you very much for it. Then something really cool happened when I was in New York. I was representing a lot of political dissidents who belonged to the Chinese Democratic Party. And one of them actually invited me to one of their meetings. They were all Chinese. I was the only non-Chinese there, but they welcomed me with open arms. And I just loved the camaraderie and the discussions that they had. I learned so much from them, and they also valued what I brought to the table because I knew the law and I was able to help them communicate with local community leaders.
中国民主党全国委员会发表声明，谴责亲共分子的暴力行径，并呼吁美国当局介入调查。
中国民主党全国委员会发言人律师艾飞力在周五晚通过连线宣读了声明。
这场袭击是被中共指使的可能性非常之高。我们欢迎异议，但以暴力方式表达反对在我们社会中，这个是没有地位的。如果我们的人民因为害怕在集合表达观点的时候受到袭击而不再敢于集会，我们的民主将不能继续。
They even gave me opportunities to give speeches on their behalf. For example, there were events for certain prominent political dissidents, and they gave me the opportunity to give speeches in the community. I thought it was just so neat. I started going with them to events to protest the Chinese communist tyranny that is overwhelming China. And a lot of these events were actually in front of the Chinese consulates, both in New York and in LA. It's pretty wild, but it's really a great manifestation of the people's disgust as to what's happening in China today. And then when I moved to LA, I went to a local meeting here. And during that meeting, they were actually doing the elections, which were going to be valid for 2 years. They were looking for people to serve on the 5-person board. And they were asking who wanted to go, and lots of people were raising their hands. And I'm like, nah, I'm not Chinese. They're never going to elect me to the board. And I had that thing in my gut, but then I just raised my hand and I said, okay, fine. I want to throw my name in the hat and let's see what happens. I gave them a speech. I told them about my passion for helping Chinese refugees and opposing the tyranny of the Chinese government, as well as some of the people I had helped within the Chinese Democratic Party. And I was elected actually with the most number of votes. It was overwhelming. And just a few weeks ago, we had that same meeting to have the election, and I was reelected to be a member of the board with the most number of votes again. I can't believe it. I'm not Chinese, and yet they've really accepted me. And I think it's because they see how I enjoy serving them.
然后我们的那些兄弟姐妹，他们不受那些共产党的那些教会呢，他们不得不去那些地下教会。地下教会感谢中共给我们抓，给我们迫害，给我们酷刑。妇女的生育权，中国共产党非常感谢你们。 把那些不懂事的女孩，叫他们不能超生的。超生的话，如果大肚子我们发现了，产生堕胎，但是这个是为你好，你不能违反国家的政策。
So this is the path I took to find one of my greatest passions in life, which is to serve Chinese refugees and oppose the tyranny of the Chinese Communist Party. If you haven't found your passion yet, make sure to watch this video, which talks how you can go about finding it. Folks, I feel privileged to live in this country where we have freedoms. We can worship whatever we want or don't want, and we can express our political opinions without being afraid of getting arrested or tortured. I hope you feel as blessed as I am when it comes to this regard. Stay true to yourselves, and I will see you at the next video. Thanks for your support.